Hello and welcome to Camera Basics. If you haven't seen one of these before, this is where I go out in the real world, taking real shots in real situations and talk you through the basics of camera operation for landscape photography. This time we're going to be talking about the histogram, which I consider to be an essential tool for getting that perfect image every time. Avoid under or exposing your image. So if you've just got yourself a new camera or you're getting into landscape photography, or maybe until now you've been making do with the basic light meter on your camera, then this is the video for you. So stick around and I'll show you how to get the perfect exposure every time. So first things first, what is the histogram? Well, it's basically a representation of every pixel in your scene and the light level of that pixel. So everything on the very left is pure black and there's no detail in that at all. You'll never be able to recover it. It's just pure black. Everything on the very right, if it's cutting off at the very right, is pure white. And again, same thing, you won't be able to recover any detail from that. It'll just be pure white in your image. You'll never be able to recover it. So you don't want to clip off either the right or the left. You want, ideally, unless you're shooting directly into the sun or maybe into a cave, you know, certain situations where you want all pure black, pure white, you're using it for artistic effect, you want everything to show up in the middle like this exposure here. So I've got my phone set up here just to record my camera screen so you can see what I'm talking about and show you the live view of my camera and the histogram as I change settings. So as you can see from this, we've got this about right at the moment. We've got two different levels. We've got some quite dark pixels in the very left of the histogram. And then we've got some quite light pixels, obviously being the sky, on the right hand side. Not too much in the middle, which is absolutely fine. So as you can see, if I decrease the shutter speed, the histogram moves over to the right. Start to clip on the highlights and we get an overexposed image. That'll mean that all those bits on the right hand side are just pure white, no detail in them at all. Same is of course true if I increase shutter speed, we'll get less light into the shot. Everything moves over to the left and we've lost all of the detail in those shadows and dark areas. And these will just be completely black, again with no detail. So why wouldn't you just use the light meter? Well, the light meter is fairly basic. It's been around since the days of film photography, and depending on how you have it set up, it will work in slightly different ways. I have mine set up so that it will detect the light in focus area. So as you can see, as I move the focus area around on this image, it will adjust my light meter to that point. So if I'm focusing on the really dark background, the light meter is showing the image is slightly underexposed. If I move up to the sky, it's showing that it's overexposed. Focusing it on Culver Towers themselves is showing a nice, decent exposure. So it's not as good as the histogram overall, because the histogram shows you the whole scene in one easy to read diagram, as opposed to having to sort of mess around with your light meter and compromise in some way or another. Now I can already hear some of you screaming at your screen saying that my camera doesn't have a histogram. And that's probably not true. Most modern digital cameras will show you a histogram, but they don't always show it in live view. In fact, it was one of the main reasons I got rid of my old Nikon Z5 and replaced it with the Z5 was because I wanted that live view histogram. However, if they don't show you one in live view, what you can normally do is view it after you've taken the image. It does require a little bit more playing around, so let me show you how I would deal with that and how I did deal with it for the 6 or so years that I had my old D3400. All you do is you focus your image on your subject, turned off my histogram, and I can see that my light meter is showing that on that bit that I'm focusing at, which is the important part of the scene, it is slightly overexposed. So let's drop that down a little bit. So it's down to, it reckons, 250th of a second based on the light meter. So let's take that shot. And if we change that to the playback mode, you can see that we've now got our 4 histograms, which actually gives you a little bit more detail than it does in just live view, because you've got one for each colour, or each of the primary colours, as well as the main white. And now we can see that, according to this, we could probably do with exposing it a little bit further to the right, I would say. So if we go back into our camera mode, we'll just take that down a little bit, maybe down to 160th of a second. Take that shot. And now you can see the reds are probably overexposed in that. Everything else is looking pretty good. So maybe we want to drop it down to something like a 200th. Let's take that one. And now you can see that is bang on, I would say. We've got all of the primary colours there. They're all showing up. We're all within sort of limits of the histogram. The main white is also there, showing up again within limits. And I would say that is bang on. So you can do it, even if your camera doesn't have a live view histogram. There's no need to go and buy new gear. I know we all like going and treating ourselves to new gear, but you can use the camera you've got. It just takes a little bit more playing around bit of taking shots, trial and error, but you'll get the shot perfectly in the end. Okay, so what if you can't help it and you've got clipping on the left or right and that's what your scene has and that's what you need? Well, as the sun starts to set, that's exactly what's going to happen. So let's get a bit closer to the sea, get that leading line back, leading into the towers, and I'll show you what to do in that case. Well, glorious evening it's turning out to be. This is absolutely fantastic out here. Just starting to get some orange colour in the sky. It's looking brilliant. I've just put on a 10-stop ND filter just to try and smooth out some of this water. Now we're a bit closer to the sea. And the same principles apply, no changes. You just need to increase shutter speed, obviously, and the histogram will tell you exactly what you need to get that exposure correct again. Okay, so as you can now see from my histogram, we've got clipping on the right-hand side, which is of course the sun, just being all white, but there's also quite a lot to try and get into that shot. Now I'm starting to get some colour in the sky, so we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. And that's where you might need to start bracketing. Now what that is where you take a series of shots, normally 2 or 3, maybe a few more if you need it, but normally 2 or 3. And that's where you take one underexposed, one overexposed, and one correctly exposed. What you then do is you jump into Lightroom or whichever editing software you're using, and you blend them all together, and that will create a nice composite image of the 3 exposures you've got. It'll capture all of the dark details from the overexposed, capture all the light details from the underexposed image, and then your main subject hopefully will be in the correctly exposed image, and that will cover everything in the shot. So here we are, we're taking our 3 shots. We've now got 10-stop ND on, so we have increased the shot time a little bit, but I'll still record the screen so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see we've got one underexposed here, we've got the histogram pushed up right to the very left, and if we take one shot there at 8 seconds, then that'll be underexposed, so that'll capture all of the really light detail in the scene. That'll capture it really well because obviously we've underexposed it. Now if we go right through, I like to do the correctly exposed shot next, just so I know which order they are when I get them back into Lightroom. So that's at 15 seconds, and that should be correctly exposed for the towers, and that'll give us a nice shot of those, which will be in the middle. And then in a sec, once that's finished, we'll take an overexposed shot, which will capture all of the dark areas, and then we'll blend the 3 together. So that's that 30-second image just finished, and it's beautiful, beautiful. But as you can see, the sun is completely overexposed here, but it has given us a lot of detail in this darker area. So now what I'll do is jump back to future Alex in the editing room, and he'll show you what it looks like when you stitch 3 together and what the final image comes out like. I'd forgotten I said that. Let's jump into Lightroom and I'll show you how you stitch 3 images together. So here we are in Lightroom. We've got our 3 images which you've already imported, number 12, 13 and 14. So we'll simply select those and go into the develop module. Making sure they're still selected, we can right click on any one of those and go into photo merge and choose HDR. You'll then get a new window pop up with a few settings in it. I generally leave auto align ticked just to align the 3 images. I generally leave auto settings also ticked just to give you a good starting point for your edit. Some people prefer to untick that and start from scratch. The deghost you might need to play around with. If you've got a lot of movement in your images, then you might want to play around with the options there. Generally, if you take them on a tripod and there's not too much going on in your scene, then you can generally leave that as none or low, which is generally the best option. And then just simply click on OK. Lightroom will take a few minutes and it'll then generate your composite image of those 3, which we've then got here, and that's now ready for us to throw a basic edit on. For this, I'll just make it look a bit more like the true to life scene, so we'll probably increase that colour temperature a bit to really bring out the orange colours. We'll increase the shadows a little bit, although those rocks in the foreground were incredibly dark because obviously all the light was coming from behind them and that sun was incredibly low. So I'll probably leave that fairly natural, fairly dark, and then we'll just play around with a few of the other settings just to get everything bang on. Probably crop it a little bit, and I'll show you the final image now. Now there are a couple of things that you do need to know when you're doing exposure bracket. One, you definitely want to be on a tripod because obviously you need those images to all be exactly the same composition so that your software can stitch them together afterwards. If you've moved the camera around too much, then it's not going to be able to work out where each pixel goes, and that's not going to work. Secondly, if you've got a lot of movement in your shot, then that's not going to work as well. Water, like we've got today, is sometimes a little bit difficult. If it's a windy day, that also can be a problem. Good tip with the water is put an ND filter on, smooth it out, and that will give a more uniform look for each of the 3 photos, make it a little bit easier to stitch together afterwards. And the last thing is don't wait too long between taking your shots. You know, you want to take these in fairly quick succession, because if the sun is setting and you're waiting 5 minutes between taking each one, then again, it's going to be a completely different image for each shot, and your software isn't going to be able to work out how to stitch them together, and that's going to be no good. You can get a bracketing feature on some cameras that will do everything for you, so you just tell it how many shots you want, it will take the 3 shots, but I do think it's good to know and do it manually so you know what's going on, know what the camera's doing in the background, and if you haven't got a camera that does that, you know what to do at the end of the day. So that's the manual method. If you've got one that does it automatically, good for you, use it. I still prefer to do it manually, just to have a bit more control and know what's happening. Well, I think that covers the basics of using the histogram and why you should use it over the basic light meter. I hope it's been helpful. Now I'm just going to spend a few more minutes, I think, enjoying this beautiful evening. Hopefully that sky turns a lovely orange colour in a minute after that sunset. Absolutely wonderful out here. Switch back to a 6-stop ND, just as it's starting to get a bit darker, but what a brilliant evening. Feel like spring is finally on the way, winter's over. Can't wait to get out a bit more with the camera. What a fantastic evening it's been. The sky didn't turn out quite as orange as I was hoping, but never mind. I really hope you've learned something from this one. It certainly helped my photography when I started paying attention to the histogram. Stopped all those awful moments where you get home after having a fantastic day out on location, only to find that half of them are under or overexposed. You've got to delete them, which kind of put a damper on the day. If you have enjoyed this one, give it a quick like so YouTube knows you liked it, and it will show it to more people, maybe help them out as well. If you've got some tips of your own, leave them down below and then we can all learn together. If you've liked it, give this one a quick watch, this one here, and that's where I'll show you some more tips on focal length and aperture. Maybe that'll be helpful as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.